Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. this game I got beat. This game I got beat. Did I blunder my queen at the end there? I thought I had a better hold of that game. So let's see. This game I might have switched lead. It might have been a switch in lead. So we'll open up a couple these two games for review. Here's the game. This is the game that I won. We're probably gonna go over that at some length. And these two games, I lost them both, but I believe there was a switch in lead in one of the two, and the other two was interesting me only if. So this game interests me if maybe I lost my queen towards the end. If not, I'm just pretty much got beat again. But I remember this game fairly well. So here I had black. I never had a good control of the game, so we'll kind of. I mean, here I had some probably a definite draw technically or something. That's why it's at even. But with the amount of time I left myself, I can't claim any kind of thing about a win because I didn't win, and because I had 3.4 seconds left on my clock in a position with rooks and 3 pawns aside. So that game is out. Let's see what the highlights were like. Alright, I don't want to go over that game. It just doesn't, it's not very compelling for me right now. And this is a game, let's see how do we do in this game. Yeah, I like how I am here off the start, but somehow I let it go with Queen G3. And then, I think what happened here, folks, is White's turn to move. Queen G3 allows Knight to H5. So, okay, that's fine, but that's for the game. For me, as a player, why I would play Queen G3 too speculatively. I'm thinking I might be able to win the Knight on H6 because the pawn is pinned, right? And then the queen's threatening checkmate and everything. It is a little bit too speculative to make a move like that after I've established really good position. White's position here should be look at Torch 4. White's position here should be pretty darn good enough, Maybe we always want to play best move, but Queen G3 is too speculative. I'm gonna find these moves that my opponents will play, like Knight H5, and now the Queen is forced back, and it's not clear if it's really all that bad, except maybe my opponent's Knight has made it to H5 safely, and there's a battery on D8 and E7. Queen on D8, bishop on E7, so these dark squares are all controlled very strongly by black. Anyway, let's go over this. Take a look here, folks. How come, or why is this a good position for white? Okay, let's go through the things. Safety, equal. Both kings are very safe. Space. Black has more space. Although white also has some space, so a healthy lead for black in terms of space. How about mobility? White's queen is the strongest piece on the board, whether she's the queen or not, but by how she's controlling the board, White's queen is the strongest in terms of mobility. The rook will move to E1, the rook at F1 will move to E1 and have a lot of mobility, and the rook at A1 might double behind this rook at some point, or play to the D file and be pretty darn good there. White's knight at C4 or at C3 has an outpost here, perhaps is eyeing e4. You never know. Sometimes jaunt over to a4 might be justified if the tactics warrant it. White's dark squared bishop is strong one of the tied for the second strongest diagonal that a dark squared bishop can place himself. He's also could be used to capture on h6, even immediately, some would say. And then black has to contend with doubled pawns right near his king. White's light squared bishop isn't doing all that well in mobility, but very importantly holding down the pawn at f5, protecting a pawn at c4. Is not doing all that well in mobility, but he's doing about as well as he can do in this position, save for moving to e4 and becoming a force along the h1 to a8 diagonal. I had everything. I had everything going for me in this position except for material. I think if I were to play this again, I'll probably play the bishop takes h6. Let's see if that's delectable for our engine torch 4. Engine wants g4, and that's okay. Yeah, g4 is a good choice also because of the follow-up. We're threatening to fork, and there's probably some. Well, it looks like any material advantage gleaned from that doesn't arise until quite a bit later than where we are on the game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves later. Okay, so I missed something that was quite deep. I can live with that. White's still doing well after this non-optimal non-optimal exchanges. And here I find the g4 idea, only it doesn't work here because black can move out of the would-be fork with tempo and a very secure, almost very secure dark squared bishop. I would be worried only about this dark squared bishop were I black about the move f4. The knight's a daydream and a dozen away, so this is a great place where my opponent placed his they bishop right here on e5. Okay, reasonable moves. I still like my decision to play knight a7, threatening the fork. What knight a7 here does is I've played knight to b5. My opponent says I'll play a6, and I say the idea still works. Knight to a7. The idea still works. The hole is still there on c7, and no matter how you threaten that knight, maybe intimidate him or anything, but he's just gonna go back to c6 at worst. So I'm not all too worried about that. And plus, rook b7's out because of the battery on f3 and d5. Alright, some moves. I'll take away a long-range piece, except that was now seen as not the greatest move. Here's a point. Yeah, okay. There's probably something out there for us to investigate with all kinds of calculation, but also white can just say, I have time. I can wait. Pawn to b3, this beautiful pawn chain, 3 pawns long, and then a bishop at the end of it to make things clear that that's not that the kingside pawn chain that white has amassed on white squares is not the only white square white pawn chain in town. Okay, this is not the only guy in business. And white shows here. This would be a game that I would play again to demonstrate, or maybe I'll do this, but not probably not tonight. White has this extreme advantage in space. All these squares. Yeah, you count the squares behind the pawns, that kind of stuff. Look at this advantage in space. We own what I think is the only half-open file with a rook on e1. We can place that rook to well, e4 is a little bit tricky maybe, but I think maybe e2 makes sense, so as not to get in the way of the battery, and so that the bishop has maybe an occasional escape route or something. But rook to e2 and then rook to e1, and we've got doubled rooks on the e5. Screw it. Queen to e3. We've got triples. We've amassed a trip. Not a trip. We've amassed triples against black's side of the board along the e-file. White's king is safe as it's gonna be. Still safer than the black king on h8. We don't have a knight to do a smothered checkmate or anything, but this is looking a little bit like maybe there's a back rank checkmate looming in the distant future. This is a position that is very strong for white. My opponent played queen g5, and hunting this pawn. So my idea was to hunt down the a6 pawn, and I did, but it looks to have cost white too much. I gotta spend time getting back to b7, and that doesn't work out tactically because knight takes f5 was freeing. That's the other part of it. Maybe extended a bit too far with bishop b7, and then my opponent found a really strong move. The move, a couple moves later, knight takes f5. Making use of the pin. And perhaps that was the reason for queen g5 earlier. Now, yeah, there's no queen on the board for white, and white has lost. What a great game, though. There's a rare few games that I don't mind so much the fact that I lost. This was one of them. And as we saw, this was the most recent game to complete. My third game against this opponent, Arapafrida, and it was mostly white's gonna build a strong lead in development, and then make improvements gradually. Some of this doesn't really need all that much of going over. I have one point to make towards the end of the game. When my opponent starts stepping out into the milieu with his king, I'm thinking I can probably push things my way. Now, knight to d5 is a great move. Black has the choice between king d7, where he's going to lose some kind of material or something due to the discovered attack on the d file, right? That doesn't look healthy to step into this discovered attack. And on king b6, I set up the potential, most of this, I set up the potential for a discovered attack along the g1 a7 diagonal, and white might be able to win some kind of material. Now for sure, it's in this position a time-wasting move by black, say h6, and we've got the discovered attack against the king at b6. The knight moves to f, and it goes knight f5 check, king moves, and then the knight is free on e7. So stepping out of that gets my opponent's king to a5. I respond with king c2 is the type of move that shows a lot of maturity in my play. Old Jordan might have just looked for some kind of exchange, and now I'm gonna barrel through by rook d5, but the king moves and it's fine, or the pawn moves to b5 to block, and even that could be fine. Maybe maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. The new me, I don't want to leave all that much up to chance. King c2 allows the advantages white has in this position to stay. I don't have a whole bunch of material, but king c2, and soon enough we're threatening checkmate. It was the potential of an eventual rook to b5 that attracted me towards king c2. And yeah, okay, the king can move to a4 after that, but between you and me, I won't want to be that king. And compare these two kings against each other, I'll be fine and dandy and much safer on c2. So anyway, we saw some of this in the game. We're going to trade pieces here, but then after the trade of pieces, white is still holding through these three squares. Any attempt for black to get off of the first rank is doomed. And rook a1 is coming. So I think that probably the best move, the computer best move, might be something like pawn to c5 probably makes sense, and then you capture, and then the computer throws pawn to b6. I'm not exactly sure which moves, but the point of my maturity is to just move my king, solidify some pawns, alright, so some ancillary benefits, and then rook to a1 check is checkmate. It's coming sooner or later. Here, let's play it out. I want to play this out. Alright, so like the sort of last ditch efforts, I think they're called. And then rook to a1 check is kind of like checkmate, but then you can throw this bishop a4 in front, and the next move is checkmate. Wow. I had a lot of fun. Alright. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.